In ancient times, during the period when Israel was governed by judges, the people experienced a profound era of spiritual and social turbulence. The nation, divided into tribes, had settled in the Promised Land, but lacked a strong central leadership capable of maintaining unity among the tribes and guiding them in the ways of God. This period, known as the Era of the Judges, was characterized by a repetitive cycle: infidelity to God, suffering under foreign oppressors, pleas for mercy, and deliverance through judges raised up by God. The narrative found in chapters 19 to 21 of the book of Judges brings us face to face with one of the darkest and most distressing moments of this era. Before we proceed, it is crucial for the audience to understand that the content of this story is deeply disturbing, involving scenes of extreme violence, cruelty, and suffering. It serves as a reflection of a society in chaos, estranged from divine principles. Thus, this story may not be suitable for all audiences, and sensitive viewers should be aware of the themes that will be discussed. With this caution in mind, it is also necessary to immerse ourselves in the historical and cultural context of the time. The people of Israel, newly settled in Canaan after the death of Joshua, the leader who had guided the tribes in their conquest of the land, found themselves in a leadership vacuum. In the absence of a king, the tribes acted independently, following their own ideas of right and wrong. The Bible vividly describes this period. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Judges 21:25. This moral and spiritual chaos created an environment where acts of extreme cruelty and injustice became increasingly common. It is within this context that we encounter the figure of a Levite man, a native of the hill country of Ephraim. As a member of the Levite tribe, he belonged to a group set apart for the service and worship of God. However, even the Levites, who were meant to be examples of faithfulness, were not immune to the moral decay of the era. This Levite, during his travels through the hill country of Ephraim, took for himself a concubine. According to the customs of the time, a concubine held a status lower than that of a wife, but shared an intimate and responsible relationship with the man. This concubine, for reasons not fully explained in the scriptures, committed a grave transgression against the Levite. The Bible uses the word betrayal, Judges 19:2, which implies a breach of trust. However, the text does not provide specific details about what exactly happened after this betrayal. The woman left the Levite and returned to her father's house in Bethlehem, Judah. We can imagine the emotional state of the Levite, betrayed and abandoned, grappling with the emptiness caused by such a sudden separation. For 4 long months he remained alone, dealing with what must have been a mix of bitterness and longing. The man's heart, however, still harbored a strong desire for reconciliation. Perhaps he reflected on his own role in their issues, or simply realized that the love and affection he felt for the woman still outweighed the pain of her betrayal. After this period of solitude, he decided it was time to bring his concubine back. Resolute in his desire to reconcile, he left his home in the hill country of Ephraim, taking with him a loyal servant and 2 donkeys, prepared for the long journey to Bethlehem. The trip was arduous and dangerous. Roads during that time were unsafe, especially for a Levite and his small group traveling through unstable regions without military or police protection. Nevertheless, the Levite was determined. After covering a great distance, he finally arrived at the house of his concubine's father. The reunion must have been intense and filled with emotions. The woman who had left him now stood before him, and the presence of her father only added to the gravity of the situation. Her father, seeing the Levite and his determination to bring back his daughter, welcomed him with open arms. In ancient times, hospitality was considered a sacred virtue. Recognizing the Levite's intent to reconcile, the father saw this as an opportunity to strengthen familial bonds. Thus, he insisted that the Levite stay at his house for a while. What was initially meant to be a brief visit to retrieve his concubine turned into 3 days of festivities and celebrations. The father-in-law, filled with joy, offered the Levite lavish banquets, perhaps as a way of expressing his gratitude and hope that the reconciliation would bring peace and harmony to his daughter and the Levite. During those days, there were many conversations, moments of reflection, and occasions for celebration. The Levite, though eager to return home, felt the weight of his father-in-law's request and repeatedly gave in to the persistent hospitality. On the fourth day, early in the morning, the Levite prepared to depart. He had fulfilled his mission of reconciling with his concubine and was ready to return to the hill country. However, once again, the father-in-law detained him. "Stay a little longer," he urged, insisting there was still time for another meal. Reluctantly, the Levite agreed once more. The Levite agreed, once again delaying his departure. When the next day arrived, he was determined to leave, but his father-in-law made one final attempt to extend his stay. By the time the Levite finally rose to depart, the day was nearly over. As the sun began to set, the Levite, along with his concubine and servant, started their journey back to the hill country, unaware that the night ahead would bring unforeseen challenges and dangers. Leaving Bethlehem in Judah, the group traversed treacherous lands until their path brought them near the city of Gibeah, later known as Jerusalem. However, at this time, the city did not belong to the Israelites and was instead inhabited by the Jebusites, a foreign people. As they approached the walls of Gibeah with the night falling, the Levite's servant suggested they seek shelter there. Yet, the Levite, cautious and uncertain, declined. "We will not enter a city of foreigners who are not of the children of Israel," he said, fearing for their safety in a place not belonging to their own people. Judges 19:12. Resolute, the group pressed on under the twilight, eager to reach Gibeah, a city of the tribe of Benjamin. Time worked against them, and as darkness fully enveloped the land, the three finally arrived at the gates of Gibeah. The city appeared calm, but its stillness masked internal tensions, for in those days the tribes of Israel were fragmented and lacked the unity that had once strengthened them. What should have been a sanctuary would soon become the setting for horrifying events. Upon reaching the town square, the group waited, as was customary, expecting to be welcomed by local residents who would offer them lodging. However, no one came forward to host them. This stark neglect was a clear indication of the moral and social decay within Gibeah. As hours passed, the empty square mirrored the abandonment of the ancient values of hospitality and brotherhood among the Israelites. Then, as the shadows of the night grew deeper, an old man appeared returning from his work in the fields. Like the Levite, the man was not a native of Gibeah, but a sojourner from the hill country of Ephraim, temporarily residing in the city. Noticing the travelers left helpless, the old man approached them with curiosity and concern. "Where do you come from, and where are you going?" he asked, his words carrying a tone of compassion. Upon hearing the Levite's story, that he was traveling from Bethlehem in Judah and heading to the house of the Lord, the old man grasped the gravity of their plight. He understood the danger of leaving these travelers exposed to the perils of the night. Displaying a hospitality that seemed to have vanished among Gibeah's inhabitants, the old man offered them shelter, embodying a kindness that was otherwise absent in the city. The old man offered shelter to the group. "Peace be with you," he said, his tone filled with empathy and care. "Whatever you need will be my responsibility. Only do not spend the night in the square." Judges 19:20. He then led the Levite, his concubine, and the servant into his home, providing them with bread, wine, and food for their donkeys. It was a moment of relief, a glimmer of kindness amidst the growing darkness. In the old man's house, the travelers were able to wash their feet, a customary act of cleansing and hospitality. They ate and drank, momentarily feeling the burdens of their long journey begin to lift. There was a sense of calm in the house, a brief pause in a journey fraught with uncertainty. However, the peace of that night would soon be violently shattered. While laughter and conversation filled the home, a menacing noise began to rise outside. Brutal and furious voices echoed through the silent streets of Gibeah. Wicked men, described as sons of Belial, surrounded the old man's house. With violence and cruelty, they began pounding on the door, making a horrifying demand. "Bring out the man who came into your house, that we may know him." Judges 19:22. Their sinister words made their intentions unmistakably clear. They sought not hospitality, but violence and abuse. In desperation, the old man stepped outside to confront the men of Gibeah. His heart was heavy, knowing that the sacred duty of hospitality was being trampled by their wickedness. "No, my brothers, do not act so wickedly," he pleaded, hoping to appeal to any shred of morality they might have left. The old man understood the heinous crime the men were intent on committing against the Levite, and in his anguish, he made a heart-wrenching offer. He proposed giving up his own virgin daughter and the Levite's concubine to satisfy the men's cruel demands. "Here is my virgin daughter and his concubine," he said. "Let me bring them out to you. Abuse them and do with them as you please. But to this man, do not do such a vile thing." Judges 19:24. The old man's despair drove him to an unthinkable decision. The cultural values of the time, which placed supreme importance on the honor and safety of a host's guest, pushed him to this extreme measure in an attempt to protect the Levite. What followed sealed Gibeah's fate and would have repercussions that echoed throughout all of Israel. The tension in the old man's house reached a breaking point. The depraved men of Gibeah, unmoved by pleas for compassion, refused to listen to reason. In a desperate bid to shield his guest, the old man surrendered both his daughter and the Levite's concubine to the mob. Tragically, the wickedness of these men knew no bounds. The concubine was taken by them and subjected to horrific abuse throughout the night. This act of cruelty marked a dark and devastating chapter, one that would bring judgment upon Gibeah and deeply affect the nation of Israel. The darkness brought no relief, and the city of Gibeah became the stage for an unspeakable act that deeply wounded the heart of Israel. At dawn, the assailants abandoned the woman, and she managed to drag herself to the door of the house where her husband was staying. There, exhausted and gravely injured, she collapsed and remained until morning. When the Levite emerged at daybreak to continue his journey, he found his concubine lying at the entrance of the house, her hands resting on the threshold. He said to her, "Get up, let us be on our way." But there was no response. Realizing she was lifeless, the Levite was struck by the overwhelming weight of the tragedy that had unfolded. With profound sorrow, he lifted her body, placed it on his donkey, and began the journey back home. The return trip was marked by silence and unbearable grief. Upon arriving at his residence in the mountains of Ephraim, the Levite took an extreme and shocking action. Driven by outrage and a desire for justice, he dismembered the body of his concubine into 12 pieces and sent each piece to one of the tribes of Israel. This horrifying act served as a dramatic summons, ensuring that all of Israel would become aware of the gravity of the crime committed in Gibeah. Israel's reaction was immediate and unified. The people declared, "Such a thing has never happened or been seen from the day the children of Israel came up from the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak up." Judges 19:30. The horror of the atrocity united the tribes, who recognized that such wickedness could not go unanswered. Moved by outrage and a sense of justice, all the children of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, and even from the land of Gilead, assembled as one before the Lord at Mizpah. A massive army of 400,000 armed soldiers gathered to deliberate on the events. The leaders of the tribes demanded to know how such a heinous act could occur. The Levite, husband of the victim, stood before the assembly and recounted in detail everything that had transpired in Gibeah. His voice carried the pain and anger of someone who had witnessed the destruction of the most sacred values. He described how the men of Gibeah surrounded and attacked the house during the night, and how his concubine was subjected to cruel abuse, ultimately leading to her death. He declared, I took my concubine, cut her into pieces, and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel's inheritance, for they committed such a vile and outrageous act in Israel. Judges 26. His intent was to rally the nation against the injustice and depravity that had consumed Gibeah. The assembly, hearing his words, united with a single purpose. They resolved not to rest until justice was served. The entire congregation rose as one, declaring, "None of us will return to his tent, nor will any of us go back to his house." Judges 28. They decided to confront the tribe of Benjamin, demanding that the guilty parties be handed over to face punishment. Messengers were sent to the tribe of Benjamin with a demand: "Deliver those men, the sons of Belial, who are in Gibeah, so that we may put them to death and remove this evil from Israel." Judges 20:13. However, the Benjamites refused to heed the voice of their fellow Israelites and chose instead to protect the inhabitants of Gibeah. This refusal ignited the spark of conflict. The tribes of Israel prepared for battle, resolute in their mission to purge iniquity from their midst. Civil war was on the horizon, a fight that would pit brother against brother, bringing devastating consequences to the nation. This account compels us to ponder the depths of corruption that can seep into a society when divine principles are abandoned. The lack of leadership and the absence of justice had brought Israel to a breaking point, where violence begot more violence, and the cry for justice became a rallying call for war. Tensions in Israel reached their peak. The tribe of Benjamin not only refused to surrender the guilty men, but also began readying for war, assembling an army of 26,000 men, including 700 elite warriors from Gibeah itself. These chosen men were renowned for their exceptional skill in battle, particularly with the sling. Their precision was so remarkable that they could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. Despite being vastly outnumbered by Israel's 400,000 soldiers, the Benjamites possessed an impressive fighting force. Their warriors were famed for their prowess and strategic ingenuity, and their location amidst the hills provided them with a significant tactical advantage. The situation grew increasingly dire. Before proceeding, the tribes of Israel, fully aware of the gravity of the impending conflict, sought the Lord's guidance at Bethel. They did not wish to engage in fratricidal warfare without divine direction. They inquired of the Lord, "Who shall go up first to fight against the Benjamites?" The Lord's response was clear and decisive: "Judah shall go up first." Judges 20:18. With this divine instruction, Israel prepared for battle, confident that the Lord was with them. The stage was set. The tribes of Israel encamped against Gibeah, ready for the clash. The first day of war, however, delivered a shocking blow. The Benjamites, fighting with unparalleled ferocity and skill, overwhelmingly defeated Israel's forces, killing 22,000 men. Their defensive strategy, coupled with their elevated position in the hills, provided them with an undeniable advantage. Israel, despite its superior numbers, suffered a crushing and unexpected defeat. Yet even in the face of this painful setback, the people of Israel, though disheartened, did not give up. They reorganized their ranks and with heavy hearts turned back to the Lord in tears. They desperately sought an answer and asked the Lord if they should continue fighting against their brothers, the sons of Benjamin. "Shall we go up again to battle against the Benjamites, our brothers, or should we stop?" Judges 20:23. God's response was resolute: "Go up against them." With this divine command, Israel prepared to confront Benjamin once more on the second day. But to everyone's dismay, tragedy struck again. On the second day of battle, the Benjamites once more displayed their extraordinary combat skill and strategic prowess, defeating Israel again. Another 18,000 men from Israel fell that day, and despair gripped the tribes. How could God's people fighting for justice endure such devastating losses? The sorrow was tangible. The mourning for the lives lost and the frustration over repeated defeat weighed heavily on all of Israel. The leaders and the people questioned what more they could do. Was it possible that the Lord was testing them? Or had they somehow not fully aligned their pursuit of justice with God's will? By the third day, the atmosphere was charged with both anticipation and fear. The people of Israel, now in a state of complete humility, wept before the Lord, fasting and offering sacrifices in their plea for guidance. The Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of God's presence among the people, was there. Before it stood Phinehas, the son of Eleazar and grandson of Aaron, serving as priest and intercessor. The sacred environment surrounding the Ark reminded them of the covenant between God and Israel, a covenant demanding both justice and mercy. Amid the tears and prayers, the same agonizing question was posed. Shall we go up again to fight against the Benjamites, our brothers? Or should we stop? Judges 20:28. The people of Israel, worn down by 2 consecutive defeats, were on the brink of despair. Continuing to fight against their own brothers was a heavy burden, yet the sense of justice still prevailed. Once again the Lord answered, this time with a firm promise. Go, for tomorrow I will deliver them into your hands. With this assurance, the people of Israel prepared for the third day of battle. But this time, they understood they could not rely solely on the strength of their army. The crushing defeats of the previous days had taught them the harsh realities of this conflict, and a new strategy was devised. They approached the day with confidence in God's promise, but also with renewed military intelligence, combining their faith with careful planning to secure victory. The children of Israel advanced once again, ascending the hills of Gibeah, where previous battles had unfolded. The sons of Benjamin, confident in their superiority after 2 victories, marched forward to confront Israel with the same arrogance and courage they had displayed before. The Benjamites, secure in their advantage in the hills, declared the impending defeat of the Israelites, believing the outcome would mirror the previous days. However, the Israelites, now more experienced and resolute, implemented a new strategy. They feigned a retreat. To the Benjamites, the Israelites appeared to be retreating once again, as if fleeing in defeat. Proudly, the warriors of Benjamin pursued them, leaving the safety of Gibeah to advance along the paths leading to Bethel and Gibeah, convinced that another victory was assured. Yet, as the Benjamites chased the Israelites, something was being prepared in the shadows. An ambush awaited in the hills. 10,000 chosen men of Israel lay hidden strategically, ready for the perfect moment to strike. When the Benjamites had strayed far enough from Gibeah, the ambush was unleashed. The attack was swift and devastating. The Benjamites, realizing too late that they had fallen into a trap, descended into chaos and confusion. At this critical juncture, the scripture declares that the Lord struck Benjamin before Israel. Judges 20:25. This was more than a battle between men. It was God Himself intervening on Israel's behalf to bring justice and purge the evil that had been tolerated in Gibeah. The impact was catastrophic. More than 25,000 Benjamites were slain that day, a devastating loss for the tribe of Benjamin. The warriors who had once fought with confidence now found themselves trapped, without an escape route or hope. Seizing the moment, the children of Israel advanced with relentless fury, turning their attention to Gibeah. The city that had once offered refuge to the wicked men who committed the heinous crime was now surrounded by the Israelite army. Gibeah was subjected to destruction, and a great column of smoke began to rise to the heavens, a clear signal of the city's fate. As flames consumed the houses and buildings, the dark smoke obscured visibility and heightened the confusion among the Benjamites. For the Benjamites, what had initially seemed like an easy victory quickly turned into complete disaster. The sight of their city in flames and the growing column of smoke on the horizon left them stunned. They lost their confidence and control as chaos engulfed the battlefield. They realized too late that they were facing near total annihilation. Israel had achieved not only a strategic advantage but also divine favor, rendering any resistance futile. The outcome of the battle was tragic. The once confident sons of Benjamin were now in utter despair. The survivors, aware of the catastrophe that had struck them, fled, desperately trying to save their lives. Those who managed managed to escape the city found new enemies along the way. The neighboring cities, united in the cause of Israel, rose up to destroy the remnants of the rebellious tribe. The plains and hills, once peaceful, became fields of carnage as the warriors of Benjamin were surrounded and relentlessly struck down. The Benjamites attempted to resist but were cornered from all sides. The pursuit was relentless, and the men of Israel, driven by a fierce sense of justice, attacked them without respite. The scriptures tell us that the men of Israel trampled them from before Gibeah to the wilderness, Judges 20:20 and 20:45, and the pursuit continued until sunset that day. 18,000 warriors of Benjamin fell in battle, defeated by the strength and strategy of Israel. Desperate, the remaining Benjamites fled toward the desert, seeking refuge in the Rock of Rimmon, a rocky and hard-to-reach area. However, the pursuit remained relentless. On the way to Rimmon, another 5,000 Benjamites were struck down, their lives taken in the midst of their flight. The Israelites, determined to end the Benjamite resistance, continued their pursuit to Gibeah, where an additional 2,000 men of Benjamin were killed. The final toll was devastating. 25,000 warriors of the tribe of Benjamin fell on that fateful day. However, there were still a handful of survivors. 600 wounded and exhausted men of Benjamin managed to escape to the Rock of Rimmon. There, they hid for 4 months, isolated and protected by the barren and rocky geography, perhaps hoping that Israel's fury would subside and that a new moment would arise to reconsider their fate. They were the last remnants of a tribe that, at that moment, seemed doomed to extinction. Meanwhile, the Israelite army, consumed by its mission to punish the evil of the Benjamites, returned to the cities they encountered along the way, determined to eliminate any trace of the tribe of Benjamin. They set fire to cities and villages, bringing destruction wherever they went. Fire and sword marked the end of the bloodiest civil war Israel had ever experienced. The hills of Gibeah, now shrouded in a dense cloud of smoke and sorrow, bore witness to the tragic end of this battle between brothers. However, the story did not end with military victory. Something even darker was yet to come. Sadness soon replaced the pride of victory. The Israelites began to feel the weight of what they had done. They had defeated their brothers, but at what cost? Gathered in Bethel, they recalled the solemn vow made at Mizpah at the beginning of the conflict. All had sworn that none of their daughters would be given as wives to the men of Benjamin. At that moment, the vow seemed just, an extreme measure to prevent any alliance with those who had protected the evil of Gibeah. But now, with only 600 men left of the tribe of Benjamin, and virtually no women, the tribe's extinction seemed imminent. The realization of this fact began to weigh heavily upon the people of Israel. There were only 12 tribes in Israel, and losing one of them would mean an irreparable loss for the nation, something that had never been foreseen or desired. The desire for justice had turned into a double-edged sword, and now Israel found itself trapped by its own oath. "Ah, Lord God of Israel," the elders and the people cried out, "why has this happened that today one tribe is missing in Israel?" Judges 21:3. The lament echoed among the Israelites, for although they had been instruments of justice, they felt the weight of the destruction caused by their own hands. The extinction of the tribe of Benjamin seemed like an unbearable tragedy. The next day, seeking reconciliation and divine guidance, the Israelites built an altar to the Lord. They offered burnt offerings and peace offerings as an act of atonement and a plea for mercy. But sadness still hung over the people. The promise of not giving their daughters as wives to the Benjamites seemed irreversible, and the destruction of Benjamin was nearing. It was then that the attention of the leaders of Israel was drawn to Jabesh Gilead, a city of Israel that had not participated in the vow at Mizpah. None of its inhabitants had joined the alliance made by the tribes against Benjamin. This unexpected absence opened an opportunity that, in their eyes, could solve the problem. The solution, however, was drastic and violent. They sent 12,000 valiant men to Jabesh Gilead with a grim mission to destroy the city, killing all the men and women who were not virgins. but sparing the young women to become wives of the Benjamites. This extreme measure revealed the depth of the moral crisis in which Israel was immersed. The 12,000 warriors invaded Jabesh-Gilead, exterminating the male population and capturing 400 virgins, who were taken to the survivors of Benjamin. However, even this brutal act was not enough. The 400 women were insufficient for the 600 remaining men, and Israel was still far from resolving the problem of repopulating the tribe of Benjamin. Determined to prevent the extinction of a tribe, the elders sought a new solution. They remembered an annual festival in Shiloh where the daughters of Israel danced in the vineyards in celebration of the Lord. In light of this, the assembly devised an even darker plan. The sons of Benjamin would ambush the young women during the celebration and seize them to become their wives. In this way, they reasoned, they would not technically be breaking the vow, for the women would be taken by force and not given voluntarily by their families. This plan was reprehensible and morally questionable. Born out of a desperate attempt to preserve a tribe, this situation exposed the complexity and depth of the social and spiritual crisis that Israel was facing. The idea of capturing wives during a sacred religious festival was a disturbing reflection of how far the action had strayed from the principles of justice and compassion. But driven by the fear of losing an entire tribe, the elders deemed this solution acceptable. The day of the festival arrived. The daughters of Israel danced in the vineyards in Shiloh, celebrating the annual solemnity of the Lord, unaware of the plan that had been devised against them. In the darkness of the hills, the Benjamites lay in wait, ready to spring into action. When the moment came, they emerged from their hiding places and seized the young women, taking them to be their wives. The story, which had begun with the violence of Gibeah, now ended with more violence and abuse. The Benjamites, with their new wives, returned to their lands. They rebuilt the cities that had been destroyed and began to inhabit them, trying to restore their tribe. However, the cost of preserving Benjamin was high, and the trauma of the decisions made by Israel during that time would be felt for generations. The book of Judges concludes this narrative with a disturbing and deeply revealing observation about the time in which these events occurred. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Judges 21:25. This final phrase echoes like a lament over the disorder and moral decay of Israel. The lack of central and just leadership allowed injustice, violence, and impunity to flourish. The people of Israel, without a king or a strong structure, lived in a moral anarchy, where the worst decisions were justified by the need for survival or fear. This story of Gibeah, the war against Benjamin, and the subsequent tragic solution to repopulate the tribe, stands as a testimony to how the absence of just leadership and solid moral values can lead a nation to ruin. The vulnerability of the women, treated as commodities, reflects the abyss into which Israel had fallen. They were the most affected by the social disorder, stripped of dignity and respect, victims of a system that no longer cared about true justice. The tragedy of Gibeah is not just a lesson about the consequences of violence and disobedience to divine commandments, but also a desperate cry for just leadership. It is a narrative that calls for a deep transformation in piety, so that all people, especially the most vulnerable, may be treated with dignity and respect. Israel needed a king, not just to govern, but to restore order, justice, and peace, values that had been forgotten in that time of darkness. Despite the moral decline depicted during this period, God would continue to act sovereignly, preparing the way for the establishment of a leadership that would restore justice and bring unity to the people. This void would be filled with the arrival of a monarchy, initially with Saul, and more significantly with David, a man after God's own heart, who would bring renewal and hope to Israel. The reign of David, and later the coming of Jesus Christ, the King of Kings, would be the definitive answer to the search for just and divine leadership. God's intervention would not only restore order in Israel, but it would also point toward the fulfillment of a much greater plan, the establishment of an eternal kingdom where justice, love, and truth would prevail. Even when humans plans fail, God's plans continue to unfold, bringing redemption, healing, and transformation to both individuals and entire nations. Thus, the story of Gibeah, as dark as it was, reminds us that God is always working in the midst of chaos, preparing the way for something greater and more glorious. If this story has shocked you and challenged you to reflect on your own life and how you have responded to God's call, then don't let this moment pass.